back home finally, away from the fear, but I'm not though really. The flashbacks, they still haunt me. I can hear the terrified screams and explosions when I close my eyes. I'm supposedly safe here, but I'm not.
First recorded aerial ambush in Afghanistan.
Oh! Oh!
RPM high.
You alright? I'm shot. You're okay? I'm shot.
Pretty proud of not me as an individual, but us as a flight and us as we did everything we possibly could.
Who was willing to come in and just be a good leader, be someone who was selfless and had the best interest of the unit in mind and not his own interest in mind. And things got better really fast.
And I remember seeing a big red handprint on the outside of the canopy or the door. And I don't know if it was yours or probably his, I would imagine, from holding his leg. But I just remember seeing that big, it was just a perfect impression of a handprint, big red on the door. We stayed fast and unpredictable, but it got to the point where, we were seeing so much fire from the ground that it was, whoever saw it would just mark it with 30 millimeter, and then the next aircraft could roll in on the dust cloud and know where to engage with rockets and 30s.
Hey everybody, Tyree here with Before I Forget, along with my partner Kevin. Say hey, Kevin.
Hey everybody.
And here we are with another show, another episode of Before I Forget. Go ahead and introduce our guest.
Well, I'll do it this time since you did it last time. I thought I was going to do it last time, by the way, and you kind of just stole that from me. So today we have pretty special guys. Got some pretty badass accolades to put on his uniform. Lieutenant Colonel Brian Slade. I'm going to let you tell a little bit about yourself.
Brian Slade, and you could buy all those decorations at the BX. It's no big deal. $12 a piece. It's no big deal. Yeah. About to retire from the Air Force. Had 12 years in the Army. Flew Apaches for the Army. Now I fly combat search and rescue for the Air Force. I call it my retirement glide slope or pasture, whatever you want to call it. I'm mostly on leave, and that's why I have facial hair. And I decided to write a book about 3 years ago, and it actually published last October. And the reason I decided to write a book was just because I'm guessing most of your listeners are military or at least a military affiliated. As we know within our community, everybody digests trauma in such a different way. And that didn't sit right with me. And I wanted to figure out why. And I wanted to figure out because there's those that seem to grow from those experiences, and there's those that seem to be derailed. And it has nothing to do with how tough you think they are, because some of the toughest guys I've seen were broke. I don't like to use the word broken, but appeared to be broken. And then other guys that you maybe thought might not be able to handle the strain, handle it just fine. And were able to actually grow from those experiences. And so that's something that I tried to dive in to through telling a war story, through my Apache experiences in Afghanistan.
So let's back it all the way up.
As far as you want.
Do you have any family in the military, anything like that?
No, I am the only one in my family and extended. Well, that's not true. I got a cousin now that did join the Army, but no history of military service to any extent in my family.
All right. And what caused you to join the military, the Army?
Well, it was kind of a combination or a culmination of different things. One, I'm one of 8 kids. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. My dad was a teacher, and I moved out when I was 15. So at the time college came into my view, I either needed a scholarship or something. There wasn't going to be any money coming from mom and dad. There was nothing to get from there. And then the other aspect of it was that I really was kind of an adrenaline seeker. I was big into sports, and I did have a football scholarship. It wasn't a full ride. And then just that kind of a drive is something that fueled me. And I also was patriotic. So it just kind of seemed to, all those things kind of fit pretty good together. It's like, oh, I get to go do something crazy, which I didn't know what it would be, get paid for it, and have it paid for my school. Seems like a win-win-win all the way around. And that's really what kind of got me into the military. Then I got an incentive ride in a Black Hawk, and I was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm gonna do.
That's sealed the deal, huh?
That was it. I was like, they tried to make us puke, and I'm like, this is a roller coaster with no rails. I'm all about it. Let's do it.
Man, our first time on a Black Hawk, we were deployed to Kosovo in 2002, and oh my God, I mean, dude, doors open, nap of the earth on the Balkan Mountains, one of the best experiences ever. Until they dropped us off, we had to walk 17 kilometers back over the course of a couple of days.
Yeah, that's not lost on us, by the way. Whenever I drop dudes off, almost every single time I was like, and now the suck begins. See you guys.
I'm sure I hope that they realize it and they look back on it and they're like, you know what? Listen, we're going to fly these boys out there. We're going to drop them off. They're going to suck for the next 2 days. So let's give them a hell of a ride. And they did, man. I mean, it was Lucky Charms were everywhere.
Everywhere. So you say you left the house at 15. That's really young. What happened there?
We'll say differences of opinion. My opinion and my dad's opinion didn't mesh real well. My family is very devout in the religion, and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to be. And it wasn't that I was a horrible kid, but I was kind of one of those kids that like to test all those boundaries, push the limits on things. And that my dad just said, he goes, hey man, you either stay here and do what we want you to do, or you go to juvenile, whatever they call it, detention, or you move out on your own. You're one of those 3 things. And I was like, oh, I'll just move out on my own. So that was
you joined the military. What did they think about that? I mean,
they were shocked. I mean, my mom especially, she's like, what? You hate authority. Like, well, I was like, yeah, but I'm choosing to get yelled at. It's different,
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, so do you think moving out and like kind of being on your own for those few years before you come into the military, because you went to ROTC program route, right? Or no?
At Utah State, I did.
Yeah. Yes. So
yeah. I enlisted for 7 years though before that.
Oh, okay.
So I was enlisted in the reserves as a heavy wheel diesel mechanic.
Right.
Believe it or not. And then the 3 years of college, I was in the reserves as an enlisted and a cadet.
So you think that that time from 15 to when you enlisted, Like, do you think that kind of prepared you for that? Like, you mean like because now, so I'm a drill sergeant, right? So when I see trainees come into basic training, like some of them just seem so lost, right? At 18 years old, just fresh out of high school, scared shitless, don't know what to do, what to expect. But then we get those ones who have a little bit of life experience, and it's a breeze. They handle it so much better.
I think it's kind of chicken and the egg thing. I'm not sure. Like I never saw that as a big deal. I was just like, cool, it's an adventure. And I, at first it wasn't that big a deal. I lived in my friend's basement for a year, and then that didn't work out because his girlfriend got pregnant in Three's Company. You know how that works. And so I moved out for my senior year, for most of my senior year, and I was in an apartment, and then the people that were old enough to lease an apartment, I just paid them, my portion of it. And then they got evicted, which means by being in there, I got evicted. And so the last 6 months of my senior year, I actually lived in my pickup truck. And then I showered at truck stops, and then at the locker room. And really the whole time I was just like, nah, this is cool. But part of it was like, this is my decision. I decide I could go back home anytime I want. But if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to say I'm on my own, I'm not going to do it and then drop out of school. I'm not going to do it and not carry a job. I'm not going to do it and not play sports. I'm going to do all those things, because if you're ready to be out, you're ready to be out, right? It's not you're ready to be out, but you got to get rid of something that's important, but you can need help from somebody that's they're doing this for you, or you're not willing to suck it up and have a gear shift in your back at night. It's just that's just the way I looked at it. So was it that situation that prepared me, or was it personality that led me to that situation? I'm not sure. Chicken, egg.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. So I kind of want to fast forward a little bit. So on your book, right? So Cleared Hot, you're talking about like resiliency, dealing with trauma, and how different people handle things differently. Do you, when going through these moments in your life, right? So the events happen, and do you kind of feel like, I mean, again, maybe it's the same thing, chicken and the egg, but like these experiences from moving out at 15, and then living out of your truck and showering at truck stops, and kind of, because I mean that regardless of how you feel about it, I mean that's cool, but like at the same time it's a tough situation, because when am I going to eat, when am I going to shower, when am I going to do this, like you have all these added other responsibilities on top of it. And so fast forward, and you're in the military, and you're doing some high stress things in some pretty shitty places. Do you kind of feel like that resiliency was already established, or is it a different type of resiliency altogether?
I'm going to say yes to both of those things. So I'm sure it helped in different ways that you could measure and not measure, but also it is not the same kind of resiliency. I mean, there's definitely a difference between seeing things, or being the source of blowing people up, or seeing that, or picking up people who are blown up, or any number of things that we get exposed to while we're downrange. That is a different type of resilience than sleeping in your truck, to an extent. There's definitely some crossover. I think doing hard things is doing hard things, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a mental mindset there of at some point you realize that when I do hard things, there's like a win at the end of that thing. Right? There's a gain that comes from doing a hard thing. So after a while, and I'm sure you've noticed this with people that you work with, is those guys that get that, they seek them out. They seek out hard things, and it's almost selfish, because you're like, if I do this hard thing and I power through this hard thing, there's a carrot on the other side. I don't know what it is, but it's probably going to be worth it, Yeah. And so that's the kind of resilience you seek out when you go to live in your truck. Now, when you go and blow stuff up because you raised your hand and said, I'll do this, I don't know if that's what we're seeking out. I don't know if you're the same guy saying, I want to go do that for the carrot on the other side. But the perspective still remains the same. If you still realize that if a hard thing happens to you, it doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. There's something good on the other side that can be for you if your eyes are open to that. But I don't think I sought those certain situations out. Whereas like living in the truck, that was my choice. That was like, yeah, hey, or whatever other things. I just said, I said do eco challenges when I was younger and different kinds of things. And hey, I know that if I do this, that, it's going to help here and it's going to help, here. It's going to, help all those things. So,
Yeah. I would almost say, so when Tyree and I joined, it was pre 9/11, and like we were both in basic training when 9/11 happened, and in two different companies actually. But it's one thing I think to join the military, during a time of war and sign up for a job where you're going to go off and do things, and you may not understand what that thing is. Like you sign up to join the infantry or go be an Apache pilot. And during a time of war, understanding what that job kind of means without having that experience and saying like, yeah, again, like you said, raising your right hand and saying, take me, I'll do it. So I think in that regard, we kind of are intentionally placing ourselves in front of potential hardship and potential bad outcomes and like killing people and whatever else, right? But like I forgot where I was going with that.
but you don't understand. That's why I'm guessing where you're going.
Yeah, right. Yeah, go ahead.
Because that's true. Because that's 100% true. Like when I was writing this book, I wrote it with a co-author. His name's Mike Hirsch, great guy from Vietnam era, by the way. Like served in Vietnam, but he's one of those dudes that didn't have a gun. He's taking pictures, but he's out there getting shot at with everybody else. He's just taking pictures. He's a journalist. I was like, man, I don't know if I would want that job. I want a gun at least,
Ballsy. That's ballsy stuff there.
Yeah. And what a great guy. And I picked him because he's this liberal Jewish guy and I'm like a conservative Mormon guy. And I was like, steel sharpens steel, let's get after it. And we were busting each other's chops the whole way through the writing this book. And I think that was good. Like, that sounds stupid, back and forth. And one of the things he said is like he's like big government, like government owes it to you guys to let you know more that thing's gonna what you're gonna have to do with it and what that impact's gonna be on you. And I said, one, I don't think that's true. Two, it's impossible to quantify it because it's as unique as a fingerprint to each person how it's going to affect them. I don't know. I think they do a great job of preparing us for our mission, but I don't know. I knew what an Apache did when I said, hey, I want to fly Apache, but it didn't sink in. It wasn't like, what's that actually going to feel like? Well, when you're blowing up targets, it feels pretty amazing, right? It feels pretty cool. It feels like you're wielding the finger of God or whatever you want. I mean, that thing is awesome. It's the size of a semi truck, handles like a Ferrari, goes in 3 dimensions, and can take out a city. That's just, I mean, who doesn't want to do that? Until you realize that last part.
The amount
it takes out a city.
Yeah.
It takes out a city with people, with kids, with dogs, with lives, with economy, with all those ripple effects. That's what it can do. So can they prepare you for that? I don't know. I don't think so.
No, I think you're right. When we did our training up for Iraq in 2004, we knew we were going to war. We knew we were going to be a part of the second wave of the invasion and basically establishing dominance and security and whatever else you want to call it. But did we know what it was like to go in and actually, look down our sights at a human target? No, I mean, like short of doing that in training, like you can't know. I remember my drill sergeant in basic training even asked the question, like, raise your hand if you think you can kill somebody. And everybody, we shoot our hands up because we're like, we want to be high speed infantrymen. He's like, put your hands down. You don't know until you're there. Until you have your sights on somebody else, and whether or not you'll flip it from safe to semi, and you'll actually pull that trigger. You won't know until you're in that moment. And it kind of hit me in the face. It's like, yeah, that is an interesting take on it, because I mean, yeah, on the one hand, I know what a gun does, but can I employ that weapon that way? And yeah, so I totally get what you're saying. Like, yeah, I mean, and you look at the Apache and you're like, oh man, an amazing machine this thing can do. And I want to, yeah, definitely want to pilot it. You know, when you're going through, you're training for it, right? Because you don't get to select. I mean, you can request Apache pilot, right? But like, depending on how your training goes and everything else, you get it or you
The
don't.
order of merit,
right?
Merit list. So,
and so
now,
you
I
land
was in the guard, so I knew what I was getting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, so here you are, like picking up the Apache, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to go on this deployment to Afghanistan, and you know, it's a lot different than doing gunnery, you know, at some live fire range at, you know, wherever you happen to go. Now you're at the it doesn't get any more live fire than this deployment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's kind of talk. Like, can you kind of do you remember your first out?
I do, but before we get to that, in the book, to the point that we've been talking about, I actually wrote a poem at the very end of the book that is all about what we just said. If you guys will let me, I'll read it. It's not too long.
Go ahead.
Because I think this is something that exactly what you just said. People, your drill sergeant said, "Raise your hand, you think you can kill somebody," and I did. Shoot to kill, drive on, sure, you know, I got it, you know, but no, you don't have it. And before 9/11, that's kind of where I was, and that's where I wrote this thing. And I said, you can imagine a war, you can imagine the fight. No matter what is imagined, you will not be right. I remember well the feeling that day when I saw two planes take two towers away. A pit in my stomach began to grow. I have to do something, but what? Didn't know. I long to be part of the retaliatory attack. I want my brothers in arms to know I've got their back, already in service of arms to defend this country I love, if need be, to bitter end. You can imagine a war, you can imagine a fight. No matter what is imagined, you will not be right. But on the sideline I wait, my turn still not here, to hunt down those who attack my nation dear. Go back to school, your time will come, son. I don't want to turn around, rather to the fight run. Finish my school, lethal craft learned, even more anxious, feeling my turn I have earned. You can imagine a war, you can imagine the fight. No matter what is imagined, you will not be right. Finally, the day came for boots on the ground of a country lost, now to villains is bound. The fight is real, so we practice and plan. Destruction and death fill Afghanistan. We do our jobs, pushing fear aside. Looking war in the face is a point of pride. You can imagine the war, you can imagine the fight. No matter what is imagined, you will not be right. Not what I thought or imagined indeed, fighting for people who have so much need. Evil fills caverns, so the rest they must suffer. Can't imagine a place making men any tougher. You fight not for country, for flag or for seal. You fight for your brothers and always will. You can imagine a war, you can imagine a fight. No matter what is imagined, you will not be right. At last we're back home to the land of the free. I may look the same, but I'm a new me. Things seen, deeds done, now part of my soul, and the sum of the parts that now make up my whole. Using the ugly to strengthen and teach, helping my brothers, the ones I can reach. Realities so far from what the mind will envision. Once experienced, the brain's tattooed with permanent revision. You can imagine a war, you can imagine a fight. No matter what you imagined, you will not be right. So that's totally what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You can't get it until you get it.
Right.
Right.
No, I mean, and that's the case with trauma in general. Like you don't know how you're going to handle something until you're in that. So like, how do you prepare yourself? How can you? Can you at all prepare yourself?
So one of the things that I do teach in my book is a thing called chair flying, and that is a preparatory tool, but only to an extent. You know, really that permanent revision that I said right there comes with the real task, not the trained task. The permanent revision is something once you've experienced what you've practiced and trained for, right? You can experience and train for it as much as you want, and you can become mentally stronger and all those kind of things and fortify your brain, all that stuff. But the permanent revision comes from the actual act. At least that's my perspective. And you asked on my first experience engaging with the Taliban. You know, we'd done target practice, we'd done, you know, gun scenarios and all these kind of things. And this was early on in my deployment. I was actually in what they call the aircraft commander upgrade, right? I was going to become the pilot in command of the aircraft. I was young lieutenant, so I was pretty pretty novice at this point, but I was getting ready to take on that added level of a responsibility where you're in charge of the aircraft and the guns and everything that comes off of it. But up until that point, I've been the co-pilot gunner, where you're just slinging lead and the guy behind you is keeping it up, flip spinny thing up and making sure it's put in the right situation, right parameters, all that kind of stuff. So in my first engagement, I was not the aircraft commander. I had a very seasoned warrant officer in the back seat, and I was doing the co-pilot gunner thing. And we'd been called on a lot of troops and contact ticks, but everyone that I'd been called to up to this point never went kinetic. The bad guys disappeared, or they didn't have good PID or whatever. It just never developed into an actual kinetic situation. I always called it tactical blue balls. You got all ready to go, and then just nothing's happening. So then we finally roll into this one, and I knew it was going to be different. I just felt different. And the guy on the radio, he's calling in and telling us he's taking fire from 3 different positions, and we're in the air, and he's still taking fire. Usually, then they see Apaches, they're like, but they were still shooting. I was like, oh, today's the day. But this was a day fight, and it was in a really, really, really steep canyon. There was a road on one side of the canyon about 2/3 of the way up. It kind of leveled off on both sides about 2/3 of the way up to where there was like almost a little plateau, and then it went up again. So they were on that road. They'd been an IED had ambushed the convoy, and they're taking fire from, trying to figure out where they're taking fire from. But as we rolled in there, we're trying to get that from them. All right, what azimuth, what direction, how far, what's it? And it's really hard in the daytime. You can't see muzzle flash. The enemy doesn't usually use tracer, at least in this part of the country. And it was just all this. That's the first thing that struck me. I was like, it's not just here's your target, shoot it, right? It's not that easy, right? So we start working with him and start working with him. I'm looking, and my pilot just starts getting super aggressive. We're all over on the other side of in that flat spot, on the other side of the valley or canyon, whatever you want to call it, at 10 to 15, 20 feet. I mean, just trying to push people out and like, banking around and see if we can find, because these guys are under trees, rock cracks. You're not going to see them if you're up there. They can hide really well. Probably overly aggressive, but at the time I didn't know. I was like, hey man, you're the man. I'm just looking on here trying to figure it out. And at one point we kind of were coming off that ledge to where we were over the valley. So it went from like 15 to 20, maybe 30, maybe 50 feet at the most we were. And then as we came over, we're about 200, 300 feet, and we got rocked. A huge explosion. Boom, like felt it come through my gut. The aircraft lurched up and just plummeted. And then, in that moment, I could see the rock that we were going to crash on. Like, we're done, just falling down into this canyon. And I'm like, first engagement, they shoot, we lose. This sucks. I'm like, I thought we'd do better than this, And so then your mind starts racing immediately. Like, okay, when I hit that rock, if I survive, I'm already tightening things down. If I survive, I'm popping out of here. I'm grabbing my radio, my gun. I'm going to pull Doug out of the back. We're going to fight our way back up to these guys, because there's no way we're going that way. That all these things. I mean, it's a fraction of seconds, but you're already, all those things are running through your head. And then all of a sudden we start to fly out of it. What happened is the RPG blew up, airburst right underneath us. Didn't hit us, but right underneath us. And it made all that air turn into dirty air vortices, and helicopters couldn't beat that air into submission, so it fell, right? And then it fell through the dirty air, and then Doug, being a champion that he was, continued to fly, didn't just go, we're done, which maybe I would have at that point, because I didn't know. I was a new guy. And as he pulls out of there, starts flying, now I'm like, oh, we're still here. So there's a lesson there, you don't give up until you're done, right? You do not give up until you're done, because he kept flying and pulled us back out of there. And as we came back around, I realized I was seeing muzzle flash. It was just this really faint things out of the corner of my eye. And I'm like, that's what that is. And so I verified with the friendlies, hey, there's nobody over there, right? There are no friendlies over there. And I know anything over there is bad. And so I told Doug, I'm seeing muzzle flash. He's like, shoot it. I'm like, okay. So I put the 30 millimeter connect, you call it wazzing it, but it's connected to the reticle of my eye. So I put the eye where I want it, and I pull the trigger, and it blows up the muzzle flashes. I'd done that tons of times. In fact, I was I was runner up for Top Gun in our for co-pilots in the battalion, but those were with ranges, those were targets. This is the first time I pulled trigger that was behind the target just ceased to live, right? And I don't even know how many dudes it was. It's more than one. I know that. Not that one's different than 10. It's just, it is what it is. I don't know that it hit me right then. I knew that it felt different right then because it's like, oh, that was real, but I didn't really go into it. And we kept going. And there's a saying that says, doing the same thing, expecting a different result, something like that. So we did the exact same thing in the exact same spot and got rocked second time. And this time rocks were hitting the canopy. And this time we're coming down at an angle. I'm like, I don't know if those were rocks or pieces of us, because that was just as thunderous as the first one. Actually, I thought it was more so. But now I have 10-minute-old wisdom. So I look inside at our instruments and I'm like, yeah, we're still good. We're still flying. Engines are going. Here we come back out and we fly back out of it again. Right. So I learned one thing: look at your engines, keep flying. But I didn't learn to not do the same thing that just got us there yet, because we did it twice. Then we came back around and we started to develop the situation. Hey, if they hit us there twice, they got us dialed in, and it's got to be from the other direction. Started developing that with the ground guys, figured out where he was, and took him out of the equation. Then we get back home after all that said and done. And that's when it really kind of hit me when I got out of the aircraft and my feet hit the ground. And I'm like, dude, those dudes were actively trying to kill us, right? And we killed them, right? That's what happened. And so now it's like this reality of permanent revision that I'm talking about. Like, oh, so this isn't just to bring salvation, it also brings damnation. This machine will save the friendly guys, but it does it by eliminating life on the other side, right? And I knew that, but I didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
That
Yeah,
is
we talk about it all the time. Like, I was LAPD for a minute, and I explained to people, like, you really don't know what you're signing up for until you're in the middle of it. And often, just because you think, oh, this is going to be that bitchin', cool pursuit, it's going to be so much fun, but the end result it was an accident, and now these people are all crushed in this car. Like, you weren't expecting that. It's a part of the it comes along with the territory. So for you, after your first time out and something like that happens, you almost go down 3 times damn near. What was it like sitting back when there's quiet?
well, that's when you really start to go, okay, so those guys are gone. Guys that we just fought, they're gone. They're not there anymore. Hopefully some of the guys that were with him went home and told their families, say, hey, it's not worth messing with these guys. But that's naive. These guys have been fighting since whatever 209. It's not even a 1 in front of it. They've been fighting since. They don't get mid tours. That's their life. Like, it's their life. That, oh, our buddy's just blown up. That's a Wednesday, right? So that was really the thought process that was going through my mind. I actually had a pretty profound respect for the enemy, that they're willing to go toe to toe with something that can just, you're gone, right? And they're shooting, in effect, pea shooters at us. Now they can take us down. I mean, later, and I got shot up throughout this deployment, and a couple times they took out an engine, they took out my flight controls with these little pea shooters, right? So they are effective, but it's still the tenacity and the courage to go against something that ferocious. I had to have respect for that. But then at the same time, I was like, I raised my hand to do this. So I have to operate in the ugly, but I got to be really careful to not let this ugly operate in me. So I'm not going to hate these guys. I'm not going to hate them. I can hate their cause. I can not agree with that. But I'm not going to hate them, because I feel like that's just putting a fissure inside my heart that's just going to grow. And that is a coping mechanism that a lot of guys do. If you're taking away the guy's life, it's easy to just, I'm gonna hate these bastards. They're screwing kids and all these other, and some of that's true, right? Some of that is true. But for me, it was important not to hate them, because if I did, then when I'm pulling that trigger, I might not be doing it with the integrity that I should be doing it with, if that makes any sense.
I think, yeah, no, it absolutely does. Because, and it's the exact same thought process that I had in those moments. We were in Iraq in 04. We were mechanized infantry with the Bradleys, the 25 millimeter Bushmaster. And October 1st, 2004 was Operation Baton Rouge. We had to go back in and retake Samara. And I'm sitting up on this rooftop, and I see one of our tracks down in this intersection, just like gunning down people all night long. People would run out in the street to shoot an AK, RPK, RPG, whatever it was, and the Bradley would just knock them down left and right. It's got thermal, it's got night vision, it's got all kinds of good stuff on there. And when you think about it in that moment, you're like, what are these people doing? They don't have the technology, they don't have the armor, they don't have the weaponry that we have. Why are they doing this? And so you really do have to respect, and that's a whole thing. I think even in Art of War, it even talks about like respecting your enemy. If you don't respect your enemy, then you've already lost.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever their cause may be, whatever it is that they truly believe in, that's what they're. And you think as Americans, if the roles were reversed and some superpower rolled into our country, we would do the same thing. We really would, right? And we would try and hold our own as best as we could and become as creative and as possible. And I think the moment, and the moment you begin to hate them, to replace whatever it is, whatever emotion you feel with hate, and honestly, to me, it's you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're dehumanizing yourself, which is only going to affect you later on when you come home. Because for us, we do deployments. For them, that's life. They can hate us. That's life. They kind of need that hate to fuel what they're doing. Sure. When we come home, we have to reintegrate back into our personal lives. If you're in the National Guard, Army Reserve, you got to reintegrate back into a civilian life. And a lot of people don't think about that. Like, you're on this deployment, 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, you come back, you have a reintegration period down at Fort Hood or Fort Bliss for a month, 2 months, whatever it may be. And then bam, you're right there back at home, wherever that was. When we came back from Iraq, we got back February of 2005. I was off active duty 90 days later. 90 days later, back home in Arkansas, and combat veterans from the global war on terror were not a thing, not in the civilian market, right? So I had a conversation with my uncle, who was a Vietnam veteran, and that's the only person that I could relate to. That's a 40 some odd year gap, from the time he went to the time I went. And I struggled with that, because at first I was like, yeah, I'm going to hate these people. But then, we saw a lot of that, right, in the early GWAT, and that's where we started developing this, like, this certain level of Islamophobia, like, I'm going to hate these people because, I know what they did on 9/11, and I know what our boys in uniform did over there in Iraq and Afghanistan and any other Muslim country. And that it's the language that we use, right? The Muslim country, and that develops this level of hate towards these people. And we saw it all the time. People were not comfortable practicing their religion. Women were not comfortable going out wearing their burqas and their hijab in America because of this level of hate that was created. Because when we're deployed, we think that we have to hate our enemy to fight them. And that's just not true. One of my favorite, and I know I'm talking a lot, but like one of my favorite pictures that I've ever seen, an American soldier on the beaches of Normandy, right? He gets off the boat, he's running across the beach, and bam, gets gunned down by a machine gunner, right? They knew where he got gunned down. He lived, and they knew where he got gunned down. They knew about where the machine gun fire came from. There was a German soldier in that bunker operating the machine gun. I assume it's the same machine gun they still use, the MG3. Somehow they were reconnected. They both survived the war. And this picture is of them meeting on that beach 80 years later, 70 years later, saying like, I forgive you. The German saying, I'm sorry. I didn't want to be a part of this. Like, it was just how it was. And them hugging. Extremely powerful photo right there on Normandy, where it all went down. And not a single bit of hate in it. right? You have to respect the people you're fighting. And it's almost the term enemy almost has this like hateful stigma to it. And I think that kind of plays a part in the trauma and our response to trauma that we develop later on.
It absolutely does. I mean, that's why I wrote the book, is because we all respond differently. And I got with people when I got home that were a lot smarter than me. They had 3 letters behind their names, you know, those guys. And I'm like, hey, how come I feel stronger and better prepared for life in the future based off of all this craziness? I'm not happy about it. I'm not like, hey, that was fun times, you know. I mean, some of it was fun, but not the ugly stuff. I mean, the ugly stuff is ugly, but it's all, I see it. I felt it was all firming my foundation, right? It wasn't adding fissures in my present, which is what I saw happening with a lot of my peers. And so we sat down and we really drilled down into things I was doing when I was downrange, and my upbringing and who I, you know, all those things. And there were some things that we could teach, you know, not all of it. You can't teach all of it. I had a mom and a dad, nuclear family. Statistics show you're going to be a little bit more resilient if that happens, right? There's just certain things that you can't teach. But I found 7 principles. Well, we found 7 principles that were teachable, and that's what we kind of covered through the book. And one of them was, do not harbor hate. Do not hate your enemy. Define your honorable mission, right? So that is a coping mechanism that absolutely can exacerbate the results of PTSD once you get back, or even, you know, some guys, it's not even before they get back, it's while they're there, you know. So yeah, you're right in what you're saying.
It's interesting that you after that first mission you go back and you kind of had that realization, because for me it didn't happen like that. Like we saw combat a lot in 04. And I remember, you know, we would come back off a mission and, you know, like one of the Bradleys would have taken somebody out or something like that. And we come back and we're high-fiving and congratulating and all that stuff. And, you know, keeping track of, you know, kills and all that, and being excited when you finally get a confirmed kill. And then it's not until later on, like when, for me anyway, when I was like, that confirmed kill, what that translates to literally is I just killed a human. I just took out a human being,
right?
You know, they were fighting for what they believed in, and I was there.
A human being that you could have hugged in that battlefield, like the German down, if he wasn't killed, right down the road. Now, I'm not saying that happens that often. I mean, that's rare that you get that, but that just brings that point home to your story, right? We have differences. We have different reasons why we're there. We have our countries to support. You know, not everybody is this malicious dude that's out there. You know, like the enemy isn't all like these hate-hardened people. Some of them are doing it to protect their family because they're under threat that if they don't fight, their family gets killed. I mean, there's a lot of other things that go into all of it. Or they might just be a jackass, hate-filled person, and they may have a change of heart later because they're human beings, right? So it's one of those things that if you get wrapped around like hating just a painting, if you will, like a picture of what your enemy is, that hurts you. That hurts you, and it negates your ability to see those occurrences as things that happened for you, not to you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It does.
I think it's very heavy if you really
yeah.
If you really stop and think about everything that has anything to do with combat and war. We were kids when this thing first kicked off. Me and Kevin were anyway. I don't know how old you were, Brian.
I'm 46. I'm a little older than you guys. But...
a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the training behind fighting, you live with these people. It's a beautiful thing in some cases if you really think about it. You're learning your craft with your friends, and then at some point you're going to go and apply that. And to not hate the person that you're fighting against while fighting with your brothers, people who you love and you would hate to lose, it takes a certain kind of person to not hate in the middle of that. Because if you've never been in combat, anyone listening, it's I can't describe the situation. I could say it's insane, but I mean that wouldn't mean anything to you. Things are blowing up. There's people getting hurt. There's everything that's going on in your head. There's everything that's going on in that person over there's head. There's so much different radio chatter. There's the noise of the battlefield, and you have to deal with that and still do your job. Again, in our case, we're just infantry guys. We're on the ground, but you have, like you said, you're flying this semi truck sized thing in the air that can pretty much shoot way farther than I can. It's a pretty impressive amount of firepower that you have at your fingertips. When you actually applied that, what was the feeling knowing that you have to do it again for the next few months?
So here it's such a mixed bag of feelings, right? So like James said, there was some like, hey, yeah, we took it to him, we did that. That's part of war, right? And there's almost like a dark humor that comes with war that is another coping mechanism that we do, right? Like there's this thing. But I've always said if I'm in something, I'm in it, right? I'm not going to halfway do it, right? I'm there to sling the Apache and turn it into this lethal machine that it can do, to unleash its capabilities, because we're here for a purpose. I'm going to do that. That's my job. But I'm not going to do it with hate in my heart, and I'm not going to do it just without integrity. And I know that sounds crazy. You're killing people. What do you mean without integrity? You're killing people. But there is a right way and a wrong way to do it. And you could people can argue it's all wrong, and they might be right. That might be a valid argument that it's all wrong, but it doesn't matter. We're there, and that's happening, and that's our job. So, and I always say, and this is something my girlfriend's pointed out, like I always say, those that raise their hand and say I'll go do it, they're my brothers until they prove otherwise. They just are, because they did that. They said, I'll go do it, right? I'll go operate in that ugly, because not everybody wants to do it. Right. And you can argue about the reasons we're there and all those other kind of things. But the bottom line is somebody has to say, we're going to at least have a fighting force so that people don't come mow us over. Right. And every once in a while, we are activated to be that fighting force. So if you're going to be that fighting force, be the fighting force, but do it from a healthy perspective. And that's where I feel like we need to do a better job in the military. We need to do a better job in not just military, but across the board, in preparing people's mind for traumatic events, right? Not specific, because we won't know what the specific is, but let's I call it the art of a Teflon mind in my book, but developing just a certain level of preparedness for ugly, because you're going to see ugly. You're going to be part of ugly. And if you're not prepared for it, it is going to have lasting scar tissue inside your gray matter. But if you are prepared for it, maybe it leaves a little groove. Maybe it's not going to get out of it unscathed. I don't think that you can do that, because it is a part of you, but it can be a part of your foundation. It can be a part of a better version of you, because you now have a deeper understanding of humanity. I'm telling you, when I got rolled in on bad guys, I didn't hesitate to blow them up. But you know what's with the bad guys? Their wife, their kid, their goats, their whatever. And those all got blown away, right? Whether we want to say it did or didn't, it did, because they are in the same freaking building, right? That's just the reality of it. When I went back as a combat search and rescue guy, once I transitioned into the Air Force, we pick up people, not just our people. We pick up civilians, we pick up enemy, we pick up whatever. And I had to pick up kids with shrapnel and missing limbs from Apaches, right?
Wow.
So that was full circle for me. Was I a surgeon and missed every single kid when I engaged? No. I guarantee those same things happened when I was engaging. We rose our hands, and with that comes a lot of other things that we should be doing, like let's prepare this for what we're going to have to do, because otherwise we're going to do what we're called to do, because we rose our hand, we're going to come back, we're going to be jacked up, right? Or at least we're going to feel like we're jacked up, because we didn't know how to digest what just happened. We didn't know how to file it in the library of our life where it needs to be filed. And that's like an experience that happened as something ugly that happened to us, but it didn't happen to us. It happened for us. There's something to be gained from that. Right.
Yeah.
So that's really the whole point of my book. And there's, like I said, I talk about it's a war story though. Like I was real sneaky with the lessons. I didn't want it to be like a school book. Like you might, if you're not even reading it for the lessons, you won't even notice it.
No, but that's all good. Like really thinking about what you just said. Like if anyone didn't really understand that, going from combat to rescue now, I could never imagine personally going back and trying to save the people who I just really blew to pieces. I was a Bradley gunner for a little bit, so I know what it's like, the image of shooting someone with a rifle and then the image of shooting someone with a big machine. It's a big difference. You know, you can see a lot more. And then in your particular case, going down there and looking at that and dealing with that on a first case basis, that's incredible. I don't think I would have been able to deal with that personally. So hats off to you for that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it took some effort. I'm not going to say it was easy.
Damn it, Tyler, you made me forget what I was going to say.
No, I had to say it, man. That shit was...
No, yeah. No, you're right, though. Like, I'm sitting here, I was thinking about it, too, because, you know, I can think of one time when we were deployed where, you know, we had to patch up somebody that we had shot down. And it was an interesting... I wasn't one of the people that ended up shooting the guy. He ended up driving through our checkpoint, and we, you know, wounded him through his upper right arm. He had arterial bleeding. Doc threw a tourniquet on them. You know, it was a whole thing. But, you know, being able to like just kind of like, here and now I'm shooting this guy, and oh, he's not dead, but he's a non-combatant now. So now we have to do our job and patch him up and make sure that he's alive. But it was a whole thing. That is extremely heavy. And it's what's wild is like, you know, Tyree and I have combat experience. Tyree has 13 years of LAPD experience where he's done all kinds of wild shit. And so for him to say, it's hard for him to imagine that. I mean, like, I don't think people understand. And, you know, it's crazy. People back home, you're listening to this, watching this, hearing that story, reading that story, and they're like, well, here's what I would have done, or here's how I would process it. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Do you actually know until you're there? No, you don't. And that's the whole point of this conversation.
Which is fine. Be grateful you don't.
Exactly. 100%. Yes.
Be grateful you don't.
Yes. Yeah.
Be
No,
grateful
absolutely.
if it happened. Be grateful if it happened and you experienced it, because you can grow from that. But be grateful if you don't. Right? Like that's definitely a blessing. And I have no desire to go back and do it again. We'll just say that.
I'm sorry. You got a question, Kevin?
When I was just gonna jump into something else, but go ahead.
Oh no. The transition from the Army to the Air Force. What caused that?
Well, my first deployment with the Apache was 23 months long. So, and I had been married for 5 months prior to that. So at the end of that deployment, I'd been married for 28 months, and 23 of it was deployed to Afghanistan, and in one crazy experience after another. For whatever reason, and I don't know what this is, but I deployed and I got in more engagements than pretty much anybody else in our whole battalion. I don't know why. Like, good luck, bad luck. They call me Magneto. You know, it's just like this whole, you know, thing. But I was like, if I'm going to make this marriage work, because it was strained. And in fact, this is one of the things I cover in the book too. So I used stories that everybody can say, yeah, that's traumatic. That's a traumatic experience. And then I say, you know what? My mind was pretty much prepared for that. It didn't really, I mean, it was reflective and pensive in nature after it happened, but it didn't really derail me. But you know what did? A caustic relationship. You know what did was dealing with a woman who had mental illness, who I loved very much, but I didn't know how to succor her. I didn't know how to deal with her at 2,000 miles away while I'm trying to blow up enemy. I didn't know how to do that. That messed me up a little bit, right? And so I'm sitting here and I'm saying, yeah, blowing up and getting the engine shut out, coming out of the sky, dude, and everybody's like, whoa, that's traumatic. And I'm like, yeah, but I was okay. This other stuff messed me up. So the reason I say that is because people can relate to a bad relationship, People can relate to a bad childhood. People can relate to a bad trauma is trauma. Pain is pain. Resilience is resilience, right? Now, we did talk earlier about a little bit different kinds of resilience. That's true. But like, we're not going to sit here and trauma compare. I know, trauma envy, whatever you want to call it, right? I used to think that the fobbits, we call them fobbits, you guys probably did too. They were like, oh, I got PTSD because indirect fire. We're like, come on, man. No, you didn't. But some of them did, right? Some of them really did. It was life altering. They were not able to digest it. It did not get filed in their past as an experience. It got blocked in their present as an obstacle they had to deal with every single day because they chose to relive it. Not like I'm choosing like, oh, I want to relive this, but it was not filed correctly, right? So that's what it is. Your trauma is your trauma.
I make a comparison. Like, okay, so like, so maybe you had a car accident and you witnessed somebody die, there's decapitation, blood everywhere, blah, blah, blah. Traumatic. Your brain processes that the same exact way as getting out of bed in the middle of the night and stubbing your toe and feeling trauma from that, because now you're paranoid about what's on the ground. You know what I mean? A strange sound in your house can create trauma. A near drowning event can create trauma. Going to combat can create trauma. Seeing something that you're not ready to see can create trauma, and your brain processes all of it the exact same way. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how insane it is or how intense it is. It doesn't matter if you were this like high-speed Delta Force Navy SEAL Ranger guy who did 18 years in combat and slaughtered 1,000 people, and now you're struggling with the consequences of that, versus the person who almost drowned in their bathtub because they were a little too overweight and they couldn't get out and the water went over their face. It's the same thing in the brain. The brain processes it the same way. So trauma is trauma, like you said. I wanted to, you talked about the training in the military, in preparation for these deployments overseas and going off to do these jobs. How does the military, how do we enhance that training to make us better at dealing with that trauma, in your opinion?
That's a really great question. First, I will finish answering Tyree's. I crossed for the Air Force because they have shorter deployments. Bottom line, that was it. I was like, if I'm gonna try to make this marriage work, it's got to be shorter. I now do something. I just happened. So I wrote the book because of what I told you, the discrepancy. My intent was always to have a training event be developed from this book, a training event that would help guys become more resilient, to be more prepared for traumatic events, so that when that happens, it's now an experience. It's not this thing, right? And I didn't know what that was going to look like. I just was talking to the guys that were way smarter than me. First thing I asked them was like, am I a psychopath? Because it's not really negatively affecting me like it is some of my other friends. Is there something wrong with me?
Yeah.
And I was a real concern. I'm not even lying. Like, I really was concerned about it. And the guy's like, if you're concerned about it, you're probably not a psychopath. So for those of you out there that are listening to this and think the same thing, if you're worried about it, you're probably not a psychopath. So we figured out those things and we started to develop it. And then I had a buddy of mine say, hey, you like to do hard things, go do this 3-day training. I'm like, what's it about? He's like, just go do it. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm free this weekend, I'll go do it. So I went and did it. And when I did it, I was like, this is it. This is the capstone to my book. This training is what I don't have to invent it. It's already here. It already exists. And really, it operates from the premises that we're not broken. Like so many therapies and self-helps, it's not self-help and it's not therapy. It operates from the premise that you're not broken. You had experience. You experience addiction. You experience this. You experience that. And you choose. You just simply choose what you want to experience, right? And I'm simplifying it. You really have to dig in and start. There's a methodology to getting your brain, your perspective to pivot, so that not only do you see what I'm talking about, but actually can now file the things where they need to be filed, right? So that's something that you can do as a repair, but it's also as a prepare. You can prepare people by having them learn this type of way of thinking, because when it happens, I'll give you an example, and this is post having this training. I'm going through this training. In fact, it's pretty recent. You guys have heard the movie The Covenant? Just came out not too long ago, right? Did you watch it?
I did.
Yeah.
Okay, at the very end when they're pinned down and they're like blah 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 blah, and it looks hopeless and everything, and then the Apache and the AC-130 come over, and there's a FLIR image of all the guys coming over the hill, and they take them out. Okay, that was very realistic for lots of situations that I was in. Very like it connected a lot of synapses in my brain that said, whoa, we're here, we're back, not like a flashback or anything like that, but it was like, and I started to breathe like, and this isn't something that's really ever happened to me. I'm not even, this is interesting to me. I'm sitting next to my girlfriend. She's looking at me because that doesn't happen. But I started to breathe like this. And it was like this. It was like I stepped out of my body and looked at it and said, you know why you're experiencing this. Just experience it. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's part of your past. It's part of what made you you.
Yeah.
Right. And it happened, it got through, and it was intense in a good way. And then I got to be able to go, okay, so why was that? Why was that intense? And then it really hit me, because this is one of the things that we talk about in the training too, is the yin and the yang, right? We've heard that, right? For everything good, there's bad or equal, whatever. So what a unique position you are in when you are pulling a trigger and killing enemy. Because in that moment, an action made by you, taken by you, puts you on the extreme ends of both the yin and the yang at the same time. You are ensuring damnation and salvation, right? You're saving these guys, you're killing these guys. Same move. You're on extreme ends of the yin and the yang. That in and of itself is a highly energetic act that's going to have highly energetic effects. And they can be powerful to benefit you, or they can be powerful to bury you. If you're able to look and say, this is part of what you have experienced for you, just experience it, learn from it, get back when it's over, no big deal. But if it's one of those where you haven't learned to do that, you're jumping underneath a freaking seat and having to go talk to a therapist, right? So the training that we do is called Trauma to Triumph. And I've partnered up with that guy. I was like, hey man, can we do this for first responders and vets and whatever? Because this is what they need. He's like, yeah. So that's what we do. And that's one thing. So to answer your question, that's one thing I think that the military could adopt and teach.
Okay. Yeah. That's what did you call it though? You said trauma what?
Trauma to Triumph.
Trauma to Triumph.
Yep.
I like it. And I think you're right, because you know, like, again, like you can't prepare for any specific one thing. You can go out and train scenarios and run different operations and missions. Is it going to prepare you for all of it? No. Is it going to prepare you for some of it? Like a small percentage, right? So I like, I'm a big fan of how you say salvation and damnation, because it's never really occurred to me to really think about it that way. Like on the one hand, you're saving, your people, right? The people that look like you, right? You're uniformed, you're American soldiers, or Marines or whoever. But on the other hand, like you're causing damnation for somebody else on the other end, and that's a big thought. It's a big responsibility. But to me, it sounds like one thing that it sounds like to me is being able to reflect, actually think about how you feel about something, to process the actual emotions that you just had, and ask yourself, why do I feel this way? Why is this happening? And I like how you say it didn't happen to you, it happened for you, because every event that happens in our life is a chance to learn from something and grow from that, good or bad. Doesn't matter how big or small it is. And it sounds to me like one of the biggest things that you've done to work through a lot of this bad stuff is reflection, introspection, to look at yourself, to look at these emotions, to look at like like you said, when you were watching that movie and that scene came on and all of those synapses could align and you're right back to that moment, but then like you step outside your body and like just experience it, and then later on ask yourself, why did I experience that? Why did that happen? Why did that alignment happen? Why was I taken back to these moments? And understand it. Because if you don't do that, and this has been from my personal experience, if you don't do that, it will bleed over into everything else in your life and impact everything else and can ruin your quality of life, especially if you let it happen for years and years and years. We saw a lot of this in the past when it came to Vietnam veterans. They came home and they were not welcomed back, and we didn't understand the horrors that they had to go through in their war. And like PTSD wasn't really labeled at that point. We didn't really understand what it was. We shell shock or whatever you want to call it. We understood that it was a thing that happened to them. And and that was also, there's a cultural thing too. Like, you're a man, be a man, man up, right? All of that stuff. And so these guys are just trying to like work through it. And, I meet a lot of them in my job, and it is kind of sad because a lot of them don't like to talk about it until like they find out that you did something too, and then they open up. And it's like, after all this time, they've wanted to open up, they've wanted to talk about this stuff, but they just didn't know that they could. And that's an important thing. One of the very first reviews that we got on the show was from a Marine who had said, I didn't know we could talk about this stuff. Like, yeah, absolutely. Talk about it. Yes. Bring it to us. Talk about it to everybody. Talk about it to your friends. Talk about it to people that actually, that care, talk about it. Because if you don't, one, the people that love you won't understand. I mean, they'll never truly understand, but they won't understand what you're going through. They won't understand when you sit there in silence, when you watch a movie, or you're just, trying to have a good time at the 4th of July party or somebody's birthday party or something, while you're sitting there in silence, just kind of staring off. They don't understand what that date is. Talk about it, and two, like, it helps you process this stuff, and it helps you have a little bit of reflection. And to me, like, that's really what it kind of sounds like, is that you've done a lot of reflection and have been able to identify that these things are events that happened for you to grow from. And that's an important an important, what is the word I'm looking for? Distinction. Yeah. But it's not something that happened to you before you, right? Like, woe is me versus how can I grow from this?
Yeah. I think it's important that you said you have to sit in it sometimes. We've all had that really fucked up situation where will go back and like, oh, I don't want to think about that because it was so bad. I don't want to, like you said, we don't want to learn anything from it because it was so traumatic. But sometimes you have to really sit in that situation to absorb it. You don't really appreciate it until you really think about it. Like, man, I made it through something incredible, or I caused something really incredible to happen. I need to reflect on that. I mean, not necessarily right when it happens, because bullets are still flying and shit. But when you get back, don't run away from the thoughts, because if you run away from the thoughts, you're gonna run forever. You're gonna get tired. Sometimes you have to stop and shake hands with them and hug with those thoughts and really understand them. Like you're saying, you have to. Your family may not understand you, okay, but you may not understand these thoughts. You have to communicate with yourself to get this shit under control. It's fucking heavy. It's not easy. I've ran from things for years. I've lied to myself. Oh yeah, I've never had any bad dreams. I've had a couple. Oh yeah, I've never had any ill thoughts towards anybody or anything like that. That's bullshit. Like, I have to stop and really think about it. Like, no, it made me a different person.
That's okay.
Yeah, and that's okay. Exactly. That's okay. You can learn, and sometimes you have to sit in it and absorb it to move on, more or less. So that's fucking heavy to me, man. I can't really explain how appreciative I am of you bringing up any of that stuff, because that's real.
Yeah, it's something that that we all need to hear and need to understand. For sure. Yeah, I can see there's a book that helped me out a lot when I first came upon it, and it helped me out a lot with my PTSD and everything. And that was On Combat by Dave Grossman.
Oh, I thought it was the Cat in the Hat.
Yeah, yeah, Cat in the Hat was number 2 for sure.
That's a good book.
Cat in the Hat or Dave?
Both.
Yeah,
Of them.
yeah, no, but yeah, but in his book he talks about these case studies and the trauma response, and it's about the psychological and physiological effects of a traumatic experience before, during, and after it happens, right? Your book is talking about how to handle trauma, and you sprinkle it in, and you're talking about like, here's these experiences, and here's these things, and here's a nugget of information in a way to get better. And I've given my copy of On Combat to people. I'm on my like 5th or 6th copy of it now, and I just hand it out to people, and I can see your book being the same way. You know what I mean? And that's because it is something that we need to hear, right? Not just veterans, people who've ever experienced any type of trauma, whatever it may be. I
got good feedback from Dave Grossman on this book, so
that's yeah, and General Petraeus, that's pretty badass, man. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's not just us saying it's a good book; it's people who actually matter.
And people that know, right? People that actually know this content, this subject, who are saying this book is legit. And so to our listeners and watchers and people of the show, go get this book, right?
I don't know if I said what it's called. It's called Cleared Hot. My co-author always gives me a hard time. He's like, dude, you don't say the name of the book till the end of the podcast. What the hell's wrong with you? So,
well, we'll probably name this episode Cleared Hot. So there it is
there you go.
Yeah.
And that was for a reason. I named it Cleared Hot for this quick reason. You guys know, and probably most of your clients know, not clients, your audience. Sorry. Most of your audience knows that Cleared Hot is a directive that we're given once we've met all the criteria that we can meet in order to engage decisively with ordnance and lethal force. That's Cleared Hot, right? Well, in our life, we often feel like we're waiting for all of these type of things to line up so that we can engage with purpose and intent. Like, oh, I can't. But here's the deal. You've already reached it. You've already met the criteria. You are cleared hot. Move forth with purpose and decision and decisiveness, because you're already cleared hot. You're already cleared hot in your life.
Dude, that's deep. Like, that is sound advice right there. Good Lord, man. I like it.
It's deep as the ocean. Yeah. So, hey, I have to be that one that says the time of the show is coming to an end. I cannot.
Everybody has a pooper.
Well, I know.
Every party has a pooper.
I'm that one. Again, I can't thank you enough for coming on. And normally we would ask certain questions. Now I think this is a new question I'm going to use to end the show: is what advice would you give to yourself before you joined? Any sort of anything.
Before I joined, I would give myself the advice to go to the training that I now went to after, because I mean, I feel like I digested my experiences fairly well, but had I had that type of a mental pivot prior, the whole thing would have been seen that way all along the way. And I just feel like it would have been that much more powerful. So understand things happen for you, not to you. And there's certain experiential trainings or transformational type trainings that you can go to, and they're not all created equal though. So do your homework, but yeah.
All right. Well, please tell our listeners the easiest way they can contact you. If you want to be contacted by anybody, any social media, any Facebook or anything like that, Twitter, or now Stitch,
LinkedIn.
There you go.
Yes, I don't know Stitch. I don't know. I thought that was like one of those Disney characters, but like, I'll send you guys all my links for it. But I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a couple websites: clearhot.info, triumphovertrauma.net. And there's ways to the triumphovertrauma.net. It does get, if you want to do the training or donate to help somebody else go to the training, you can do it there. clearhot.info is just the stuff about the book and the principles that we talked about and all that. So you can reach me at all those places. But you guys got my media kit, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the link, there's a sheet in there that has all those links.
Yeah, we're actually gonna. I'm gonna. So on the at least on the YouTube side, I put all of the links to everything. I'm gonna link your book in there, link your everything. So it's all gonna be right there. So for our viewers and listeners and watchers, actually for our viewers, if you're on YouTube, in the description of this show, it will be everything you need to know about Mr. Slade here and his book and where to find it and all that good stuff for sure.
It's on audio too. So
Yeah,
that's fairly recent. So.
Nice.
And everything's the same with everyone on our music or audio platform. So hey everyone, thank you for listening to Before I Forget, the greatest podcast in the history of podcasts. Do you have anything you want to say in the end there, Mr. Slade?
No, I've pretty much said it all. You guys have heard me enough. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, and thank you for coming on. Kevin, you got anything before we close this out?
No. Again, Mr. Slade, I appreciate you coming on, man. Like it's been a really good experience listening to some of the things you had to say for sure.
And as usual, please like, share, subscribe, watch, and share the show. And Kevin, you got the last word. What do you got?
Shut up.
There it is.
No, we're good, man.
The end. See you later.